moment someone attacks you publicly, throws an accusation, questions your character, or challenges your authority, your natural instinct screams, defend yourself, explain your position, clear your name, set the record straight. But Machiavelli knew something that 99% of men never learn. The second you defend yourself, you've already surrendered your power to your attacker. Watch any powerful man in history, Caesar, Napoleon, Churchill, and you'll notice something chilling. When accused, they didn't scramble for explanations. They didn't justify their actions. They didn't beg for understanding. They did something far more devastating. They let their accusers destroy themselves in the silence. This isn't about being passive or weak. This is about understanding that power operates by different rules than fairness, that perception matters more than truth, and that the man who feels compelled to defend himself has already declared his accuser as judge. In Florence, 1513, Machiavelli sat in a dungeon cell, broken by torture, his political career destroyed by men who accused him of conspiracy. He could have spent his remaining days defending his innocence, writing letters of justification, pleading his case to anyone who would listen. Instead, he did something revolutionary. He stopped defending and started studying. What he discovered would terrify the powerful for centuries. Defense is the language of the guilty, explanation is the currency of the weak, and justification is the confession that someone else has the right to judge you. The men who destroyed Machiavelli's career were masters of a game he had been playing wrong. They understood that in the theater of power, being right matters less than being in control. Truth matters less than perception. And innocence matters less than the ability to make your enemies destroy themselves. This principle extends far beyond politics. In corporate boardrooms, social gatherings, family conflicts, and romantic relationships, the same dynamic plays out daily. Those who understand it rise to positions of influence and respect. Those who don't spend their lives explaining themselves to people who have already made up their minds. Today, you'll learn why defending yourself is psychological suicide, how silence becomes a weapon, and why the most dangerous people you'll ever encounter are those who never feel the need to justify themselves to anyone. When someone accuses you of something, incompetence, arrogance, dishonesty, whatever, they're not seeking information, they're establishing dominance. The accusation is a power move designed to put you in a defensive position where they become the prosecutor and you become the defendant in a trial you never agreed to participate in. The moment you say, "That's not true, let me explain," you've accepted their right to judge you. You've agreed that their opinion matters more than your reality. You've transformed from an equal into a subordinate who must justify his existence to his superior. This is psychological warfare, not truth-seeking. Your accuser isn't interested in your explanation. They're interested in watching you scramble. Every word you spend defending yourself is proof that their attack worked. They've gotten inside your head, disrupted your composure, and forced you to react on their terms. Machiavelli understood that power is about controlling the frame of interaction. The person who sets the terms of engagement, who decides what the conversation is about, who needs to prove what to whom, that person holds the power. Defense automatically places you in the weaker position because defense implies there's something that needs defending. Most people defend themselves because they believe explanation leads to understanding, and understanding leads to vindication. This is naive thinking that ignores how human psychology actually works. People don't form opinions based on logical evaluation of evidence. They form opinions based on emotional impressions, social dynamics, and tribal alignments. When someone attacks you publicly, the audience isn't waiting to hear both sides before making a judgment. They're watching to see who appears stronger, more confident, more in control. Your detailed explanation won't change minds that are already made up, but your visible need to explain will confirm every suspicion your enemies want to plant. The audience sees someone who feels compelled to justify himself, and they unconsciously conclude there must be something worth justifying. Consider how this plays out in corporate environments. When someone questions your competence in a meeting, launching into a detailed defense of your qualifications makes you look insecure. When someone challenges your integrity, Explaining your good intentions makes you look guilty. When someone attacks your character, justifying your past behavior makes you look weak. Defensive communication operates on predictable patterns that skilled manipulators exploit. When attacked, most people go through a sequence: shock, anger, explanation, justification, and finally pleading. Each stage weakens their position further. The shock shows the attack was effective. The anger shows it affected them emotionally. The explanation shows they feel accountable to their accuser. The justification shows they accept the accusation as legitimate enough to require response. The pleading shows they've surrendered their power entirely. Professional manipulators understand this sequence and design their attacks to trigger it. They make accusations just serious enough to demand response, but vague enough that any defense sounds guilty. They attack in public settings, where the victim feels pressure to respond immediately, without time to think strategically. The most sophisticated version involves multiple attackers working in coordination. One makes the initial accusation, another adds supporting details, a third expresses disappointment, and a fourth offers sympathy while reinforcing the narrative. The victim finds himself defending against a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm his ability to respond effectively. When accused and you remain silent, something powerful happens in the minds of everyone watching. The accuser expected a reaction: defense, anger, explanation, something. Instead, they get nothing. This creates cognitive dissonance that forces everyone to reevaluate the situation. Your silence makes the accusation hang in the air like smoke. Without your reaction to give it substance, people begin to wonder, is this accusation so ridiculous that it doesn't deserve response? Is he so confident in his position that he doesn't feel threatened? Does he know something that makes this attack irrelevant? The accuser, expecting engagement, suddenly finds themselves in an uncomfortable position. They made their move and got no reaction. This forces them to either escalate, making them look increasingly desperate, or retreat, making them look like they picked a fight they couldn't finish. Your silence becomes a mirror that reflects their insecurity back at them. The more desperately they try to provoke a response, the weaker they appear to observers. They're essentially having a fight with someone who isn't fighting back, which makes them look unhinged. History's most powerful figures share one characteristic: they rarely explain themselves to critics. This creates an aura of mystery and strength that explanation would destroy. When you don't defend, people must fill in the blanks themselves, and they almost always overestimate rather than underestimate. Think of the most intimidating people you've encountered. Chances are they weren't the loudest or most aggressive. They were the ones whose thoughts remained hidden, whose reactions remained controlled, whose motivations remained mysterious. The less you reveal about your inner state, the more others project power onto you. This principle works because human psychology is wired to fear the unknown more than the known. A predictable enemy can be managed. An unpredictable one must be respected. When you don't respond as expected, you become unpredictable, and unpredictable people command caution and respect. The undefended position also suggests resources that haven't been deployed yet. If someone attacks you and you don't react, observers wonder what weapons you're holding in reserve. Your restraint implies hidden strength rather than revealed weakness. When you refuse to defend yourself, attackers often escalate their attacks, thinking they need to hit harder to get a reaction. This escalation typically works against them by making them appear increasingly unhinged, while you appear increasingly composed. The dynamic creates a stark contrast that favors the silent party. As they become more emotional, you appear more rational. As they become more desperate, you appear more secure. As they become more aggressive, you appear more dignified. Eventually, observers begin to feel uncomfortable with the one-sided nature of the attack. When someone keeps hitting someone who isn't hitting back, sympathy naturally flows toward the non-combatant. Your attacker becomes the aggressor in what looks like bullying rather than legitimate conflict. This reversal can happen remarkably quickly, especially in public settings where social dynamics amplify the effect. What started as an attack on you becomes a demonstration of their character. and rarely in a flattering way. While silence is often the strongest response, there are situations where some form of verbal response serves strategic purposes. The key is never to defend yourself directly, but to reframe the entire interaction in a way that puts your attacker on the defensive. Instead of explaining why the accusation is wrong, you question why it's being made. Instead of defending your character, you analyze their motivations. Instead of justifying your behavior, you examine their credibility. For example, when someone calls you arrogant, instead of explaining why you're not arrogant, you might respond, "Interesting that confidence bothers you." This reframes the interaction from being about your alleged arrogance to being about their discomfort with confidence. This technique works because it reverses the power dynamic. Suddenly, they're the one whose psychology is being examined, whose motivations are being questioned, whose character is being analyzed. They expected to put you on trial. Instead, they find themselves in the defendant's chair. Sometimes a single, precisely placed response can end an attack more effectively than silence. The key is choosing a response that's brief, devastating, and impossible to argue with. These responses work best when they expose the fundamental weakness in the attacker's position or character. And that's an interesting perspective. Suggests their viewpoint is curious rather than credible. I see you've given this a lot of thought. Implies they've been obsessing over you. That explains a lot. Suggests their attack reveals more about them than about you. The surgical countercut must be delivered with perfect emotional control. Any hint of anger, defensiveness, or hurt undermines its effectiveness. It must seem like an objective observation rather than an emotional reaction. The goal isn't to win an argument, but to end one. The perfect countercut makes further attack feel futile rather than productive. Advanced practitioners of this principle use attacks as opportunities to advance their own agenda. Instead of getting derailed by the accusation, they use the attention it generates to communicate something they want the audience to hear. This requires exceptional emotional discipline and strategic thinking, but when executed properly, it transforms an attack into a platform. The accuser provides the audience. You provide the message. Political leaders master this technique by treating hostile questions as opportunities to deliver prepared talking points. Business leaders use criticism in meetings as chances to reinforce their vision. Social situations provide similar opportunities for those skilled enough to recognize them. The key is having clear strategic objectives that transcend the immediate conflict. When you know what you want to accomplish in the broader context, individual attacks become tactical opportunities rather than threats. The ability to avoid defending yourself requires deep internal work. Most people defend themselves because criticism genuinely threatens their self-concept. They need external validation to maintain internal stability. True power comes from internal validation that makes external attacks irrelevant. When you know who you are, what you've accomplished, and what you're capable of, others' opinions become interesting data rather than threats to your identity. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of legitimate feedback. It means developing the psychological strength to evaluate criticism objectively rather than emotionally. Valid criticism can be accepted and acted upon without defensive reactions. Invalid criticism can be dismissed without emotional investment. Building this immunity requires honest self-assessment, clear personal values, and the confidence that comes from genuine competence. When these foundations are solid, attacks become opportunities to demonstrate strength rather than threats requiring defense. Each time you successfully avoid defending yourself, you build a reputation for being unflappable. This reputation becomes self-reinforcing because people become less likely to attack someone who doesn't provide the reaction they're seeking. Your consistent non-reaction trains others to approach you differently. They learn that emotional manipulation doesn't work on you, that attempts to provoke defensiveness fail, that trying to put you on trial is futile. This creates a protective barrier around you that most people never develop. While others get drawn into endless cycles of accusation and defense, you remain above the fray, focused on your objectives rather than managing others' opinions. The compound effect extends beyond individual interactions to your overall presence and influence. People begin to see you as someone who operates by different rules, someone whose internal compass is strong enough that external storms don't throw you off course. The ultimate expression of this principle is developing what can be called gravitational authority, a presence so centered and unshakable that it draws others into your orbit rather than being pulled into theirs. People with gravitational authority don't need to defend themselves because attacks seem to bounce off them without effect. They don't need to explain themselves because their actions speak louder than words. They don't need to justify themselves because their results validate their approach. This level of presence takes years to develop, but becomes exponentially more powerful over time. It's built through consistent application of these principles, continuous development of genuine competence, and the gradual elimination of all need for external validation. When you reach this level, defending yourself becomes not just unnecessary, but literally unthinkable. The idea that someone else's opinion could threaten your self-concept becomes as foreign as the idea that their opinion could change your height or eye color. In corporate settings, the temptation to defend yourself is constant. Colleagues question your decisions. Superiors challenge your recommendations. Subordinates test your authority. Each situation provides an opportunity to demonstrate the power of non-defense. When someone questions your strategy in a meeting, instead of launching into justification, you might simply ask, "What specific concerns do you have?" This puts them in the position of having to articulate a coherent criticism rather than you having to provide a comprehensive defense. When criticized for a decision that didn't work out, instead of explaining your reasoning at the time, you might say, "Here's what we learned and how we'll apply it going forward." This focuses on future value rather than past justification. The professional world rewards people who appear confident, competent, and unshakable. Defensive behavior signals insecurity and invites further challenges. Non-defensive behavior signals strength and discourages future attacks. Intimate relationships create the highest emotional stakes for defensive behavior, making them the most challenging contexts in which to apply these principles. When someone you care about accuses you of not caring enough, being too distant, or failing to meet their needs, every instinct screams to explain and reassure. However, defensive behavior in relationships often creates the very dynamic it's trying to prevent. The more you explain how much you care, the more doubt you create about whether you really do. The more you justify your behavior, the more you validate their right to judge it. A more powerful approach involves acknowledging their feelings without accepting responsibility for managing them. "I can see this is important to you," rather than, "Let me explain why you're wrong to feel that way." This doesn't mean being cold or uncaring. It means being strong enough to maintain your center while still being loving and supportive. People respect partners who can't be emotionally manipulated, even when they're testing those boundaries. Social situations provide constant opportunities to practice non-defensive behavior. Someone makes a joke at your expense, questions your story, or challenges your opinion in front of others. The group watches to see how you respond. Defensive responses lower your social status because they signal that the attack was effective. Non-defensive responses maintain or raise your status because they suggest the attack was irrelevant. The key is responding to the group dynamics rather than the individual attack. If the attack was inappropriate for the social context, your non-response allows others to recognize this. If it was within acceptable bounds, your lack of defensiveness shows you can handle social pressure without losing composure. Social confidence comes not from being liked by everyone, but from being unaffected by attempts to manipulate your behavior through approval or disapproval. Machiavelli's insight about never defending yourself extends far beyond tactical advice for handling accusations. It's a philosophy for living from a position of strength rather than weakness, confidence rather than insecurity, internal validation rather than external approval. When you stop defending yourself, you stop living at the mercy of others' opinions. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving others the power to approve or disapprove of your choices. When you stop justifying yourself, you stop accepting others as judges of your worth. This doesn't make you cold, cruel, or uncaring. It makes you centered, strong. and genuinely helpful to others because you're operating from abundance rather than scarcity, confidence rather than fear, power rather than weakness. The undefended life is not about becoming invulnerable, it's about becoming unshakable, not because nothing can hurt you, but because your core identity doesn't depend on others' validation. Not because you don't care what people think, but because you don't need their approval to know who you are. In a world full of people trying to pull you into their emotional dramas, make you responsible for their feelings, and force you to justify your existence to them, the ability to remain undefended is not just useful, it's essential for maintaining your sanity and achieving your objectives. The man who never defends himself never needs to, because his actions, his results, and his presence speak louder than any explanation ever could.